Recording has been started.
Am
Good
I
morning,
audible?
everyone in United States. Good evening to our viewers in India, and good afternoon to folks who are joining from United States. We are here once again, once a month, for our monthly distinguished lecture series that is organized under the purview of Council for Strategic Affairs. Today, we have a distinguished speaker who would be speaking on strategic lessons from the landscape of Mitra, the geostrategic framework of Kautilya. So when you registered, you probably saw this flyer. I'm going to give a brief outline of the Council for Strategic Affairs. Council for Strategic Affairs imparts education in the field of international relations. CSA fosters discussion, dialogue, and debate on geopolitical issues. CSA encourages strategic studies in general to raise the level of awareness, and CSA aims to contribute to world peace and prosperity. We do 2 programs a month. There's a monthly roundtable discussion on second Saturday of each month at 10 a.m. Eastern Daytime. And on the fourth Saturday of every month, we have a monthly guest lecture by a domain expert. CSA also organizes symposia, meetings, and conferences. CSA promulgation of articles on geopolitics and related subjects. And we offer summer internship program for college students. So today we have a distinguished speaker, Mrs. Sumedha Verma Ojha. And of course, you are seeing her, but this is the picture we have of her from the internet. I'll briefly give an introduction. Sumedha Verma Ojha is an author, columnist, and speaker. She was born in Patna, completed her schooling in Bihar and Jharkhand, and graduated in economics from the Lady Shri Ram College in New Delhi. Those who are from New Delhi would know that it's a highly prestigious, highly competitive college, all girls. She also did her post-graduation in sociology from D School of Economics under Delhi University. Subsequently, she joined Indian Civil Services in 1992. But a very rare thing that she switched career after taking a sabbatical in 2006. Since then, she has been engaged in in-depth research on ancient Indian history and Sanskrit and Prakrit works. She has researched and wrote a book, Urnabhi, set in the Mauryan period based on Arthashastra of Chanakya or Arthashastra of Kautilya. She later expanded it into a book series on the Mauryan Empire. Sumedha Verma Ojha also works in the area of translating and explaining the epics and bringing ancient Sanskrit and Prakrit literature into the modern world, and also covering a gendered analysis of ancient India. Her free translation of Sanskrit Valmiki Ramayana was published in 2016. She is engaged in writing a book on the women of ancient India, which will set a new approach to understanding women based on the emic, Shastric, and Indic traditions of the subcontinent. So today's talk will be based on Kautilyan framework. Well, this is our map today, and this is the flag of India today. But in Mauryan time, this was the map of India when Kautilya was there. So you need to see how vast was the empire. And this is the map around Mitra dynasty, and she might be talking about Mitra dynasty today, of Koshambi. Again, back to the former Prime Minister of India, Mahamatya. He was definitely Prime Minister of India. So those people who think India started in 1947, I think do not realize that India is an ancient civilizational state. Some housekeeping rules. I would like everyone to mute themselves to avoid noise interference. Please change your cell phone settings to vibration mode only. I would not like anyone to interrupt our esteemed speaker when she is speaking. Only those members of the audience who identify themselves openly will be allowed to pose questions. So no anonymous questioners, please. All the questions have to be sent by chat function, and I will read the questions from the chat function one by one. The request is for people to be very precise and specific in asking a question. Please don't send a lecture or a monologue under the guise of a question. Finally, we are recording the event and it will be available later on our YouTube channel as well as on our website. And I must say that this is going to be a thoroughly educational session for the strategic community, because this aspect of strategic studies we usually do not see in the contemporary literature and things like that. So it's my pleasure to give the floor to Mrs. Sumedha Verma Ojha. Welcome. Namaskar. You are muted, Sumedha ji. Kindly unmute yourself.
Am I now audible?
Yes, you are audible now.
All right. So I hope I'm audible and visible. Namaskar to you. Namaskar to everyone who's watching. It's my pleasure to be here again. We had a discussion around this topic once before, where there were some other panelists, and I remember that people had wanted a deeper dive into the subject in question. So here I am on the invitation of Dr. Adityanji to lead you all into a deep dive into the Kautilyan idea of strategy, Kautilyan universe of geostrategy. So let me set out what I'm going to try and do. I am going to try and bring before you the universe of Kautilya, the universe of Chanakya. Chanakya is a towering figure about whom all of us think that we know a lot, but then the greater, deeper details of his intellectual uh, contributions to our political science tradition are often not understood. It's all right to think of the Arthashastra as a document of economics, but the Arthashastra is also a document of political science. And to situate it in political science and international relations is something which I think has not been done as much as it should be. So when I call this the landscape of Mitr, actually I have taken Mitr, not the dynasty Dr. Adityanji, but Mitr as the seventh element of the Saptanga state. What I'm going to do is give you an introduction to, a tiny introduction to Kautilya, an introduction to the Arthashastra, the story of its so-called loss, and then we will go into an understanding of the framework of the Arthashastra and where does geostrategy, where does the analysis of the international situation, the risks, opportunities, a SWOT analysis, where does it all come in? And if 2-3 thousand years ago, Kautilya was giving us an example of the way in which we could view the world through the lens of alliances, enmities, and practical relationships, etc. Is it still applicable today? So I will give you an idea of the framework as it exists, and in the end, we will try and apply it to the situation as it exists today. Because after all, for me, there is a pleasure in studying things for the sake of their original interest, but there is also a great pleasure in applying them to whatever is happening today. So let me start with, we have this document of the Arthashastra, and at the end of it, it says that this has been written by Vishnugupta. So who was Vishnugupta? From where do we know about Vishnugupta? So we know about Vishnugupta from many Buddhist, Jain, Sanskrit sources. There is a compendium of stories called the Badkaha, probably written in the 6th centuries before the Common Era. That has been lost, but certain recensions of it exist in different languages. So the story of Kautilya is there. The story of Kautilya is also there in a Sanskrit play called Mudra Rakshas, which is written by Avishak Dutt. So all these stories point to a very towering intellect, a man who was responsible for the setting up of the Mauryan Empire, for the anointment of Chandragupta as its emperor, as its samrat, for the extension of that empire. When you read about the Arthashastra today, especially if you read, the normal academic sources, they try to throw some doubt on the connection between Chandragupta and Chanakya. But that is a kind of the Indological confusion which is often cast onto many characters from or many people from our past. I have written a few articles on this and I can send you those articles. Take it as given that the connection between Chandragupta Maurya and Kautilya is an inescapable one. And Chanakya was the one who helped Chandragupta Maurya to reach the position of the Samrat of the Mauryan Empire. It is this whole compendium is strongly associated with the Mauryan Empire. It is strongly associated with the way the Mauryan Empire was run. If we try to collate it with an look at some third sources or second sources to collate whether the Arthashastra and the things written in it actually happened in the during the Mauryan Empire, so one does find that kind of evidence. Before I go into more details, I must tell you that the Arthashastra was deemed to be lost. Lost to whom? Lost to the English speaking public, lost to those who read only English and not any other language. But then, so it is in our Eurocentric and English centric world that till the 20th century, till about 1909, it was deemed to be lost. A manuscript was found at the Mysore Oriental Research Institute in 1909. Pandit R. Shama Shastri published it in Sanskrit, and then in 1915 he translated and published it in English. So it set off a kind of earthquake because the idea that there was such a sophisticated and complex understanding of economic, state, society, etc., was one that our colonial lords and masters were not comfortable with because they preferred to think of Hindus and Indians as very backward and very unsophisticated kind of people who are not capable of any very smart intellectual output. So it set off a kind of earthquake. That earthquake apart, it is my contention that saying that it was lost is itself an exaggeration. I don't have time to go into it. All these things are, there's a lot of evidence. I can just give you a little bit of it. So if you want to say that it is lost, you'll have to say that nothing exists, something existed before it and nothing existed after it. So the traditions, the academic conclusions, discussions in the Arthashastra find their kernel in the Mahabharat. So the tradition of political science, of Rajniti, goes back very, very far. So what happened? Did the Arthashastra just, get lost after the Mauryans and nobody spoke about political science or political precepts or geostrategy again? Absolutely not true. Because whether you take someone like Kamandaki during the Gupta period, who wrote a commentary on it, or you take someone like Somdev Suri, when we come to the 10th century, he wrote the Niti Kavya Amrit, again on the Arthashastra. Or you take somebody like Thiruvalluvar, who wrote the Thirukural in, say, the 400, 500 CE, which is again based on the same Dharm, Arth, Kam, only he calls it Aram, Porul, and Kamam. The point I'm trying to make here, without going into details of names, etc., is that the Arthashastra and the precepts of politics and economy in it have existed as a very deep tradition in the Indic past, and they were never lost to the Indics. Whether it be Shivaji Maharaj, whether it be Krishnadev Rai of the Vijayanagar kingdom, they ran their empires according to the precepts, the political and economic precepts, which were common to Indic traditions and which have been collated in the Arthashastra. So, with this kind of short background, I'm going to take you into the Kautilyan universe. So, what does this universe look like? This universe is one where there is a prosperous kingdom, where there is a prosperous state. And this state is situated in a very populated world with a number of other states, with a number of other kingdoms around it, with whom there has to be some kind of relationship. So there is our state, there are many states around it. Reminds you of the world today, doesn't it? So, according to Kautilya, in his universe, there is a way of understanding the state inside and understanding the external relations of the state. Today, when we look at Mitr, which is the seventh element of the state, it is we are focusing on an external understanding of the state. We are focusing on what we call today international relations, on geostrategy. So, what is the background of this understanding? Arth, Arthashastra, Arth is the goal of existence. This is well-being of each person, which can be brought about not by the individual, but by the state. That is why the state is important. What does the state do? It does two main things. The first is called Palan and the other is called Labh. Palan is to keep everything going, administration, internal administration. And what is Labh? Labh is acquisition of territory. How does this happen? This happens in two ways. Through Dand, that is your defense and army, and through Mitr or external relations. So if we want to study the internal part of this whole theorizing, then what do we study? We study the Saptanga state. The Saptanga state, which I have mentioned before, where there are seven elements of the state: the king, that is the Swami, then you have the Amatya, that is the administration, then you have the Janpad, which is the people, then you have the Durg and Dand, which is the fort and the army, then you have Kosh, which is the treasury, and then you have last, which is Mitr, which is the way in which you relate to the rest of the world. When we look at administration, we have the Saptang state. Now, when we look at external relations, what do we have? We have two or three concepts, which is what we are going to really look at in great detail, which I was not able to do last time, which is the Rajamandal theory of Kautilya, the Shadgunyam, which is the six measures of foreign policy, and the Upayas. There are the four Upayas. These are the actual practical things to do to achieve those six measures of foreign policy. And those measures of foreign policy are used in a setting which is the Rajmandal. And that Rajmandal, it is thought of in two ways by Kautilya, and I will tell you of both of those ways. So, okay, we have the our nation state. What is, we will call the head of this nation state the Vijigishu, the world conqueror. But in today's context, is it really as if this Vijigishu is going to go out and conquer the world? Not, absolutely not, because we are not in the phase of territorial expansion, and that is not looked upon kindly by the world today. Look at what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. But what we will define the Vijigishu's objective as, it is the field of geopolitics. You have to capitalize on all the political risks and opportunities to serve your national interest. So it is the national interest of the people who are there in this country are taken care of by the Vijigishu. So we will always use the Vijigishu concept as a kind of shortcut for the national interest of the state that we are considering. And do remember, this is very important, that the Vijigishu is not fixed. If India is reading the Arthashastra and wants to apply it, India is a Vijigishu. If China is reading it and wants to apply it, then China is the Vijigishu. If Pakistan is doing it, it is the Vijigishu. If the US is doing it, it is the Vijigishu. So what is it? It's a perspective, it's a viewpoint, it's a pivotal point from which to survey the rest of the world. And this system, these tools, this understanding is available to anyone who wishes to use this system. So it is a system which can help anyone to achieve their geopolitical aims. It is, if you use it well, then it is to your benefit. If your enemy uses it well, then, well, it's your problem. Why don't you use it better than your enemy? So basically, this is the field of international relations, and this is the field where our Vijigishu has to toil to make the impact and to serve the national interest of his own nation. Now, there's a very interesting thing over here. Chanakya was writing many thousands of years ago in a world where there were not one or two really just big kingdoms, but many, many, many kingdoms and many, many, many alliances. Does that not remind you of the way in which our world is functioning right now? It's, if this were the 90s and I were taking this lecture in the 90s, things would be very different because it was a unipolar world. Today, it's a multipolar world and getting more multipolar as we speak. So it is my opinion that the framework, the Kautilyan framework of Mitr, is precisely the most useful one to use in this era of multipolar and very, very fast changing dynamic relationships, because it is kind of like a sliding scale. When I show you and tell you all the categories and the way we can fit every country into it, you can see that it's a sliding scale. So as soon as your relationship or the situation or the global risks and opportunities change, you can just pick up one country and put it from one category into the other. So that is why I feel that it is imperative, it is absolutely the correct time for us in India to start thinking of this Rajamandal and to start thinking of using this to be, it should be used to our own benefit. So Rajamandal is defined in two ways. There is always a basic set of 12, but either you can understand those chapters, those shloks to mean that there are 12 separate relationships, or you can understand it as a set of four alliances with three relations each. So that also means 4 into 3, which is equal to 12. Before I go into the actual list of the Rajmandal, I will give you some more information about how all these things were actually carried out by Chanakya. When you have all these different countries around you, how do you relate to them? What is your attitude towards them? That's step one. That is what you have to understand first. So Kautilya categorizes these relationships as three. Either that country is your enemy, which means Ari, or that country is your friend, which means Mitr, or that country is your Bhritya, which means that you control that country. You are in a kind of servile relationship with it. Just look at the way in which China envisages its relationships with other countries. It does not like to think of Ari or equals, Mitra or equals. It thinks either in terms of Ari or Bhritya. Either you are subordinate to it or you are its enemy. If you think about it, the Chinese Indian dynamics from the Chinese side have always been like this. Either India has to subordinate itself to China, or otherwise, India will be seen as an enemy. So these are the three: Ari, Mitra, and Bhritya, the different ways in which you can relate to all the countries around you. Then, how are these relations executed? How do you actually connect with these countries? You connect with these countries with a system of envoys. We are still familiar with envoys. We call them ambassadors now. So these envoys were of three kinds. And these envoys of three kinds were given three different kinds of powers. There is also in the Arthashastra a kind of foreign service manual about how these envoys should be chosen, what they should do, how they should behave, what their conduct should be like. So you see that everything was thought of. The three types of ambassadors or envoys which existed according to Kautilya or should exist were those which are Nisrishtarth, Parimitarth, and Shasanhar. So this Nisrishtarth envoy was almost like the king himself going to a neighboring kingdom. This person enjoyed the full confidence of the king, went to the other kingdom, and could negotiate on a very, very powerful basis because he kind of spoke for the king. And he was obviously someone who was very close to the king, a very powerful man in the kingdom, and had full liberty to negotiate with the kingdom where he went. The Parimitarth was given some certain very specific things to talk about and did not have this wide ranging full power that the Nisrishtarth had. Then there was the Shasanhar who was only given just one this particular thing to do, and he went and did it and came back. He had no other powers. So ambassadors were of three kinds. We have relations with other countries. We have these ambassadors who carry out these relations. Then you have foreign policy or foreign relations. These are of six kinds, and we will take a look at them. And to actually achieve these foreign policy goals, you have certain things which are called upay. These upay are of four types, and we will look at them also after we look at the Rajamandal. So now I hope you have got the entire background. There is a kingdom. That kingdom has to relate with every other kingdom around it. And those kingdoms are set up in systems of alliances. The relations with them can be friendly, unfriendly, or subordinate. You have a set of envoys to um, take to do the practical things as far as talking to these countries is concerned. And then you have the six measures of foreign policy. You have the upays. This world of Kautilya, this universe of Kautilya is a very tough one. He does not talk or think of the Vijigishu as being the most powerful person or powerful kingdom in the entire world. He gives you options. You may be powerful vis-a-vis a certain country. You may be weak vis-a-vis a certain country. You may be at the same level vis-a-vis another country. So how do you deal with these differences of power? And how do you leverage everything, perhaps even your weakness, to achieve your national interest? So this is a kind of way of realpolitik par excellence. You may not be the most powerful person around, but if you follow the Kautilyan system, your national interest will never be hurt. So this is a kind of tough dog eat dog world in which Kautilya gives you the instruments to keep yourself safe, perhaps even make yourself more prosperous and achieve your national interest at the expense of all the others. So you leverage everything in the best way that you can. Now, just give me a minute while I share certain documents so that those will make it easier for you to understand what I'm saying. I'll just open that. So are you able to see the screen? Yes, if somebody will answer, then I'll go on ahead.
We are able
Yes,
to
we
see.
can see that.
We can see.
Okay. So I told you that there were two ways in which Kautilya classified and understood all the countries that were around. Now these are listed as 12. Very often, some academics have got stuck on the number 12, that there have to be only 12 countries and therefore it's very restrictive. It's not like that. These are relationships. So, a country with a relationship with you which is not very good, which is in conflict, would be in category number 2. So, it means that no matter how many the number of countries, you can just fit them into these categories. So I will just take you through these 12, although again, in my opinion, in my understanding, this I am telling you because it's written in the Arthashastra and this is one of the ways in which the Rajamandal is envisaged. Therefore, you should definitely know about it. But the other one, the 4 into 3, is far more useful for our purposes, and I will be focusing on that. I'm just taking you through this as a matter of record so that you understand and know everything which is there in the Arthashastra regarding Mitr. So you have the Vijigishu, the conqueror, so called, the person who is achieving the best balance of political risks and opportunities and serving the national interest. Then you have the enemies, Ari, the allies, Mitr, and Ari Mitr is the enemy's ally. Mitr is the ally's ally. Ari Mitr is the ally of the enemy's ally. So you see, Kautilya's mind was very devious and cunning and very complicated. So these categories are all very devious. Parshnigra is the enemy in the rear. Akranda is the ally in the rear. Parshnigraha Sar is the ally of the enemy in the rear. Akranda Sar is the ally of the ally in the rear, and Madhyam is the middle kingdom between the state and the enemy, who's not really very badly disposed towards you, kind of friendly, but you cannot count on the Madhyam as an ally. It's a bit dicey. And Udasin is the strongest kingdom which lies far outside your own neighborhood. This is the system, Rajamandal system 1. So let me now stop sharing this. And now I will share the second one. Dr. Adityanji, I know that you said that people could ask questions at the end, but since this is a slightly complicated issue, I wonder if people have questions and if you would allow them.
I think let's go ahead with your
Okay,
presentation
okay,
because they
okay,
can always write the question in the chat function if they
okay.
have, so we can take them
I
sequentially.
was just
Otherwise,
hoping that there is no problem in understanding as such, because these are quite complicated concepts and not so easy to understand
that is
immediately.
definitely true, but people will have to put more effort into understanding and learning rather than just 1 hour lecture by you.
Oh, yes, that is of course true. So again, is this visible? The second one?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So now this is the second one. This is the one I am going to focus on. This is the one which I think that today's policymakers should focus on. So what do we have? We have four categories. The Vijigishu, we know very well. The Ari is the enemy. The Madhyam, which is the middle kingdom between the state and the enemy, which is kind of neutral. And the Udasin is that strong, very strong kingdom which is lying outside and which does not normally interfere in anything. With the Vijigishu are the Mitra and the Mitra. So the ally and the ally's ally. With the Ari also are the ally and the ally's ally. The same for Madhyam and Udasin. So what does that mean? It means that these are four sets of alliances. These are four sets of alliances. You, your enemy, and your the neutral kingdom and the very powerful kingdom. All these four categories are there. All these four are categories of alliances. These are not single kingdoms. These are categories of alliances. And again, remember, this is not a numerical thing. Like we cannot say that there will be only one Mitra and one Udasin and one Mitra. No, it can be one, it can be more than one. For example, it can be zero. When I do my final discussion on how things are going today in terms of geopolitics, we may find that today there is no Udasin. Is there any strong kingdom today, strong country, which does not put itself in the geopolitical fray? There is not. So the figure in this, the number against each of these categories can be anything from zero to, whatever number of countries are there. There are around 200 in this world at the moment. So it can be anything between 0 and 200. Think of these as categories. You, your enemy, the neutral kingdom, and the strong kingdom. And with you are your friends, with your enemy are your enemy's friends. With the neutral kingdom are the neutral kingdom's friends, and with the Udasin are the Udasin's friends. This becomes very significant in today's world where there is no one country in this world today which can impose itself on any other country. There was a time perhaps in the 90s when the US Secretary of State could call up a country and just tell them to do something and they did it. That no longer holds true. We are very firmly and very strongly in the world, in the era of alliances, and these alliances, how to deal with each of the relationships, how to leverage them, that is the whole idea of the Shadgunyam, that is the whole idea of the Upayas. So I think maybe for the moment, perhaps I will leave it here so that you take a look at all these four and remember Vijigishu, Ari, Madhyam, and Udasin. Don't forget them. Before we go on to an analysis of uh, the current situation, geopolitical, and I would also like to give you a few older examples, from history of the way in which alliances were uh, actually played out from what we have on record of historical evidence. What we can go on to understand now is the Shadgunyam. The Shadgunyam are called the six measures of foreign policy. So these six measures of foreign policy, these are the ways in which you deal with the other constituent states in the Raj Mandal. This Raj Mandal is called the Circle of Kings. Raj Mandal, Mandal is a circle. And this Raj Mandal has many different constituents, and you, the Vijigishu, have to deal with each of these. So, what are these six measures of foreign policy? So, the first one is Sandhi. Sandhi is peace. There's no problem of any kind. The other is the second one is Vigraha. Maybe I can share that also with you. Let me stop sharing this and I will open the Shadgunyam. That may help better. So, can you see these?
Yes, we can see that.
Shadgunyam.
Hmm.
These are the six measures of foreign policy: Sandhi, Vigrah, Asan, Yan, Sanshray, and Vaidibhav. These are the words used in the Arthashastra, and their meaning is Sandhi obviously means peace. And peace has to be followed when you are really not in a position to do anything much. Suppose you are much weaker than the kingdoms next to you, than the kingdom which you are dealing with, then there's very little that you can do. So you have to be quiet and just bide your time because you're comparatively weak. But Kautilya, he is never satisfied with this. You cannot accept your weakness. What you're doing is just sitting quietly till you grow in strength, stature, and power. And after that, you abandon Sandhi. So, Sandhi is a temporary measure. You have to grow so that you are no longer weaker than the kingdom that you are scared of and the kingdom with whom you are trying to be very quiet and peaceful. The other one is, of course, Vigraha. Vigraha is hostility. The interesting way of analyzing Vigraha, and which I again mentioned last time, was that Vigraha can be defensive or it can be offensive. So if you remember the categories used by our NSA, Mr. Doval, of defensive offense, offensive defense, they have great parallels with the Kautilyan idea of hostility and the analysis, deep analysis of hostility, which can be done. So perhaps Mr. Doval is reading the Arthashastra and actually applying it to the way in which our national power and our state interests are actually being furthered by this administration. This can be used if the Vijigishu is stronger than the enemy because hostility is a bit dangerous. Hostility is, it's like fighting, war. A lot of resources are needed for it. So Kautilya never advocates, going off to war carelessly. In fact, I will tell you when the Upay of Yan, which we will just look at, how carefully you have to analyze everything before you just walk off and start fighting. Perhaps Russia would have been well served to have made a very good analysis before starting this yarn against Ukraine. But we'll go into all that a little later. Asan is, quietness, be neutral, because you're the same, the enemy is the same, so you're just quiet again. This is temporary in nature. So Kautilya never accepts being under any duress to anyone or being weaker than anyone. If you are weaker, you have only one option: to become stronger. So all the things that are there for weaker kings, and remember, like I said, there are many options for weaker kings because it is a dog eat dog world and you cannot always be the strongest in the world, but you have to keep striving. You have to keep striving till you become strong enough to deal with your antagonist. So that is asan, which is remaining quiet, and yan, which I've already told you when I was talking about vigraha, because vigraha is having a hostile attitude, and yan is actually, putting that attitude into practical exposition by going all out for war. Then you have Sanshray. Sanshray, of course, you have to do when you are very weak, when you just cannot do anything. You have no option. So you ask the opposing kingdom for shelter, and you become what do you become if you remember those three relationships that we had spoken of? You become a Bhritya, and you become a subordinate to that stronger kingdom. Dvaiti Bhav is a combination of Sandhi and Vigraha. And again, like I told you, this is the quick mind and the cunning mind of Kautilya at work, because you can keep the enemy off balance by sometimes suing for peace, sometimes being hostile. I sometimes also had the feeling in the past decades, especially in the 90s and 2000s, that Pakistan was reading the Arthashastra very seriously. Do you remember this combination of Sandhi and Vigraha? Are saying one day that no, it's okay, we want peace with India and we want talks, etc. The other day, sending terrorists or making some statements against India. So they were using this Dvaiti Bhav very efficiently for themselves. And in the 90s, India was just not able to do anything or deal with it except just in a very, very minor way, because, of course, Pakistan was also getting a lot of support from the US. But this combination of Sandhi and Vigraha is a very deadly one, and it keeps the antagonist off balance. So these are the six measures of foreign policy. These six measures of foreign policy have to be used as per the circumstances. So that is why I keep on mentioning to you, this is when you're weaker, this is when you're stronger, etc., etc. Dr. Adityanji, how much more time do I have?
Well, you can have maybe 10 minutes since I'm speaking. I'll just make a comment, and I'm actually sort of breaking my own protocol. Uh, as far as Dwadi Bhava is concerned, there was a US diplomat of Afghan origin, Zalme Khalilzad,
Mm,
who coined a term called congagement. And congagement is a compound word of containment and engagement. And congagement was a very fashionable term in early 2000s. So that is exactly a combination of Sandhi and Vigraha, that you engage the enemy, but also start taking containment measures simultaneously. So I just wanted to clarify at this point in time. Uh,
yes.
I would say that you can have 10 more minutes and then we'll have some Q&A.
Okay. So, what I am going to now just go ahead with is, of course, the four upayas. So, let me share that also with you so that you can take a look at what they are. So, there are four upayas: Saman, Dan, Bhed, and Dand. Saman is conciliation. Even in common parlance, we have this Sam, Dan, Dand, Bhed. We use it in, at least in North India, we use it very, very commonly. That you can use all these four methods of dealing with anything, dealing with any, not just relationship between kingdoms, but relationships between people, between organizations, within the family. So these are the ways, these are perhaps, wide, they have a wider application than just foreign policy. We are going to study it in combination with the six measures of foreign policy, but they have a wider application than that, even in the larger society, and you can solve so many problems through these four methods. These four methods, are to used to make your antagonist bend to your will. The idea of Kautilya is always very focused. The focus does not waver. The focus is the national interest. You may not at this moment be able to do exactly what you need to do to achieve your national interest. So you have these different policies, these different upayas, these measures, but you are just waiting, biding your time. And while you are biding your time, you are trying to get stronger, you are trying to look for weaknesses of your antagonist, and you want to exploit those weaknesses. So your aim is to bend everyone to your will. Your aim is to achieve your geostrategic objectives. And they are defined, the Vijigishu, the conqueror, has to define in the Arthashastra, it's more like, fighting or conquering or becoming a world conqueror. But if you really read into the way this is explained and the way it is connected to the resources and the position and the people, the seven elements of the state, you will realize that this is all about the welfare of the people. The national interest is the welfare of the people. So these upayas actually are probably even more ancient than the Shadgunyam, because we have uh, references to them from time immemorial, and they can be used to secure the submission of anyone who you are dealing with. Saman, which is all these upayas are defined in book 2. This is conciliation. It can be done in 5 ways. You praise the merits of the person you're dealing with. You mention how wonderful your relationship is. You point out how beneficial it is for these relationships to be put into place. You show the advantages of allying with you or doing whatever you ask, and you place yourself at the disposal of the other king. So this is kind of, normal diplomacy with all nations. And it is also very effective against weaker kings. Dan consists of conferring benefits of money, and this is also of benefit against weaker kings, and you can, kind of buy their loyalty. Look at what China is doing across the world. Of course, it has now mired so many countries in debt, but that was the idea, to give them gifts of infrastructure. Those gifts have turned out to be very dangerous Trojan horses, but the idea was done. The third is bhed or dissension, which is to create confusion, to create apprehension, to confuse and make people so afraid that they don't know what they're doing, and then take advantage of that. Dand is killing, tormenting, seizure of property. So bhed is done against stronger kings. Dand can also be done against stronger kings. Each one is, as we go down the list, it becomes more and more forceful. Saman is not that much force. Dan also no force, but for Bhed and Dand, the amount of force you use becomes more and more. So this is the natural order of using these different upayas. A short kind of side note. So these can be used singly. They can be used in different combinations. So if you use them in different combinations, there are 15 ways. So if you use them in the natural order, there are 15 ways. If you use them against the natural order, there are 15 ways. So there are 30 combinations of these upayas that Chanakya gives in the Arthashastra. The most important one for Chanakya is Bhed. He talks about it in book 7, 9, 11, and 12. And there it is like a very, very detailed exposition. So Saman and Dan should be used against weak kings, and Bhed and Dand against stronger kings. You should always consider the relative strengths of power, place, time, dangers of conspiracy, revolt, etc. before using all or any of these methods. You should not rush into using any of these methods. For Kautilya, the favorite one is Bhed. That is why he had this extensive spy system. That is why he has detailed in these books very, very extensive ways and examples of how you can create dissension in so many of these, uh, the kingdoms which are there. So this is so far as the four upayas are concerned. I just now will conclude by giving you two examples. One example will be from history, from the past, and one example perhaps from the modern age. So from the past, at the time of Buddha, there were 16 Mahajanpads. Some of them were small, some of them were big. The two most important ones were Vaishali and Magad. So Magad, the king of Magad, really wanted to beat the people of Vaishali. Now, Vaishali was a confederacy. It was a Ganasangh. It was the Vrijji confederacy, and it was very difficult to break. It was very, very powerful and very united. So he went to Buddha to ask, what should I do? How should I beat them? So Gautam Buddha said that as long as the Vrijjis follow the seven conditions of welfare, Satta Paridhaniya Dhamma, which means to stay united, to do everything together, you cannot beat them. So from that, Ajat took the meaning that he has to kind of send in spies, break their unity, make them fight with each other, and then only can he win. So he used the services of a Ganika, she was called Magadika, and of a monk who he brought over to his side through promises of gifts, etc. And then these two went in, created some tension, destroyed some property, and created so much fear and confusion that in that confusion, Ajatashatru was able to win over the Vrijji confederacy because everyone started distrusting everyone else because of the spies that Ajatashatru had placed over there. So this is one example of the way in which Bhed has been used. Another example now, I am going to give you an example of how the Raj Mandal, and I think that will be my penultimate example. I will just share the. All right. So I hope that this is visible to everyone.
We are able to see.
Yes. So this is what I really wanted everyone to focus on. This is the different ways in which we can use the 4 into 3 Rajamandal to understand what is happening today. Let us take one scenario when India is the Vijigishu. So we know who our enemies are, China and Pakistan. But do we know and can we say that there is anyone today who is Udasin? We can't. So we'll have to leave that category empty. We can perhaps say that Russia can be a Madhyam, EU can be a Madhyam, an important country, a big country, which is neutral to positive towards us, but not really part of our core circle of allies. Is the Quad now part of our core circle of allies? I should have put a question mark over there. The grouping is comparatively new. How much is the way in which our interests can really come together? Efforts are being made. And if you look at some of the countries or continents of the world who are not so important, you really wonder where they are all going to be fit in. So, South American countries, African countries, Asian countries, the Middle East is a little more important. You have to fit all these into these four categories. What was the problem? What is the problem for us as far as, yes, somebody is raising their hand.
No, they are just clapping.
Oh, okay.
Just
So,
clapping.
okay. So, what is the thing that was the problem for us? The problem is that the world was trying to push Russia into the ARI box, although Russia is not our ARI. And that is why it led to such stresses and strains within us because somebody who is not our Ari is being forced and fixed into the Ari box. We cannot, it does not suit our strategic interests. It does not suit the Vijigishu, which is India. And our opportunities and risks are not served in any way. And we know in so many ways, whether it be defense, whether it be so many other aspects, Russia has been a friend. So how can we suddenly make it an enemy? We can't. So using these categories, it provides clarity. What is the problem and how can we solve that problem? I have given, other scenarios. I don't know whether there is time, but there are other scenarios, whether if you want the Vijig issue, if the US is the Vijig issue, it wants India to be its close ally in the Quad. But you see, the US has an enemy called Russia. And India and Russia are connected in such ways that India can never be in the very close ally group of the US because it cannot think of Russia as its ally. Again, China and the EU. China is the enemy. It is the ally of US. But China and the EU have very close contacts. China and Europe have so many commercial interests together, especially if you look at Italy and if you look at Germany, that there is no way in which China and EU, I mean, that the EU will agree that China is our enemy without any exception, because it is very dependent on China for many things. Again, all countries of the world will have to be fitted in here. The only thing I want to show you through all these is that if you look at these different countries as Vijig issues, if Russia is a Vijig issue, if China is a Vijig issue, the categories change. And when other countries try to pressurize us into shifting our categories, or when we analyze in a very cold blooded way, we see that countries have multipolar and multidimensional needs and interests today. So we have to make different scenarios for different needs and interests and then analyze it in a very clear and cold blooded way so that we know how our own interests are going to be served. So this is by way of a discussion of modern times. This I'm going to show you this book. This is the book in the Urnabi series which has just been released. This book is based around the concept of Mitr and around the concept of Mitr, where the Vijig issue is Chandragupta Maurya. And if Chandragupta Maurya is the Vijay issue, who were his allies? His allies were kingdoms in the south, his allies were Sri Lanka. Who was his enemy? His enemy was Seleucus, the Seleucid Empire. Then who were the others, the Udasin? Who were the ones who were the Madhyam? The whole political scenario of the world, the geopolitics of the world at that time has been analyzed in this. So any of you who are interested in this category of Ari, in this category of Mitr and want to understand it through a analysis of the historical past are welcome to read this book. For the current situation, I've given an example here, and maybe any of you can think of so many other ways. What is the main point? That these categories should be properly evaluated, annotated, and analyzed in far greater detail than this. The Foreign Office should be doing a job which puts each country, all the 200 odd countries, into one or the other category, and then we should analyze our relations and see how these are clashing. We can have a sliding scale, and we can always just remember that the thing which is to be kept in mind is the national interest of the people of the kingdom. I
Thank
think
you very much indeed, Sumedha ji, for a wonderful and very educational lecture on geopolitics and geostrategic, you know, interventions, and bringing Kautilyan framework to modern world. And I think that is really commendable. During the lecture, you did mention that Pakistan must be reading Kautilya's Arthashastra. And in our last roundtable discussion, I did mention that not only Pakistan, but Bangladesh also, when they train their civil servants, they are required to read Kautilya's Arthashastra. And I think we may have made a brief sort of comment whether Indian bureaucracy
yes.
has some teaching and training. So have Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy ever invited you to give a lecture, or
Not yet. Not yet.
Manohar Parikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, have they ever invited you for giving a lecture?
Not yet. Not yet. But I hope that they will sometime.
Okay, okay. So about the framework you have presented, uh, just trying to contemporize it. If you put China as Vijig issue, So you're using the word Pankara, and we are using the word Madhyama as Middle Kingdom. Now, in Chinese folklore, China is the Middle
The Middle
Kingdom
Kingdom. Yes, indeed.
because it is at the center of the universe and the universe runs around it.
But the two meanings are a little different, Dr. Adityanji.
That is what I'm trying to say.
Yes, yes.
So, if we have to translate or transliterate Madhyama, can we have maybe an alternative English expression from the Middle Kingdom? Because people will, at least people in the, strategic studies, will
Yes.
always go back to Middle Kingdom, what it means. Uh, so maybe another English transliteration of Madhyama. You are very clear what it is, Madhyama, but
Hmm.
uh,
Well, I'm
uh,
going to note this down, Dr. Adityanji. That is an interesting input for me. And actually, maybe look at some other word used by Kautilya, which we can use instead of Middle Kingdom.
so as we speak, one of our friends, part of Team CSA, Ripudaman Pachori, has said that need to use the word buffer state for Madhyama
Actually, yes, we can
uh,
use that word.
instead of Middle Kingdom.
Except
So
that, there is an element of neutrality plus positivity. So, yes, perhaps buffer state could do. But I will definitely reread all the shlokas and try to come up with a word which is not the Middle Kingdom. The point is well made, Dr. Adityanji, that China thinks of itself as a very peculiar kind of Middle Kingdom, divinely ordained to rule the world. But okay.
now in the scenario number 3 that you presented with China as Vijay issue, you put Russia as Madhyama.
Hmm.
Uh, but actually, if you analyze Chinese thinking, Russia is not Madhyama. Russia is what they call is going to be a Bhratya, a vassal
Yes.
state.
Yes, that is true. And although I did make the point at the beginning that China is actually thinks of the world as only either it is Bhritya or
Adi or
Adi.
Bhratya.
Yeah.
So their conceptualization and their actions speak more than their words.
Yes.
They treat Russia as a Bhratya or a vassal state. So those were my comments. I'm going through the chat function, and there are a couple of comments from Vibhuti Jha, who says that Kautilya was an original thinker and a strategist. Calling him vicious is unfair characterization. So before you
Vicious.
respond to it, uh,
Vicious. Who called him vicious?
well, Vishnugupta, Chanakya, and Kautilya. Kautilya, the etymological origin is from Kutil, uh, somebody who can, but Kutil not necessarily has a negative connotation.
No, and Kutil is not vicious. Kutil is actually cunning.
Yeah. So again, there's a problem of transliteration that, yes, he was talking about Kutaniti. And well, you may prefer instead of Kutil, you may prefer the word Jatil, uh, you know, but the connotation was certainly not vicious. So it's just a question of translation. But there was a confusion, so I'm glad that we are sort of eliminating that
Although
confusion.
I will make a comment that it is people are very fond of giving him a very negative connotation. Often, Western commentators on the Arthashastra have thought of him as a very immoral, vicious, and very negative person, and that also carried over into our Nehruvian friends. So there was a very conscious decision not to use the Arthashastra because Chanakya was seen as immoral and cunning. So morality and ethics seemed to them that it was missing from the Arthashastra. It is very wrong because the Arthashastra starts with the Trivarg, which is Dharma, Arth, and Kam. And Dharma comes first of all.
I have a question here again from Team CSA, Ankush Bhandari. Uh, Sumedha it was very enhancing, but this is very intricate too. I have two questions. Number one, where I can find this in a simple way so that I can understand. Number two, how Arthashastra can be used by India in today's chaotic multipolar world. I, well, I'll just leave it for you to.
Okay, so finding it in a simple way, well, you will not find it anywhere in a simple way because people have not worked on it and they have not written on it. And but this is the only place where you will find it in a simple way. I I do not know of any other scholar who is working to simplify it. And there
So,
are people who are writing on it, but they write in a very heavy and dense academic fashion, and they do not apply it to modern times in a very simple way. So I don't know where you can find it. But I am, along with the Vivekanand Foundation, planning to do a series on all these topics. So perhaps podcasts or a daily column or something. So if that comes through, then maybe if you go to the VIF site, then you will find some of these things. Otherwise, I am afraid the study of such things, it is anathema to academics to even say that Chanakya is a theorist of international relations. So there's no question of finding it in a simple way. The other thing about applying the Arthashastra, is that what he asked?
well, you've already done, you created
Yes.
4 scenarios in the modern world. That is what he was asking. So, coming back to those 4 scenarios in which you put actually India as the Vijay issue, uh, you put under Udasin that there's no one really Udasin at this point in time. But if I look at the contemporary geopolitical situation, I will put actually Indonesia in that category. Uh,
But Dr. Adityanji, the Udasin has to be an overarchingly powerful country.
it is true, but
Indonesia does
uh,
not have that kind of heft.
it does not have, but you are not able to recreate the 3000 word. You are applying it to the modern situation. So you will be doing some bending of the concepts. But if you look at, uh, Indonesia is not really a Ripu. Indonesia is not necessarily a Mitra because they have a very standoffish kind of thing. So the only category you can pigeonhole them is Udasin. Whether it is Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, whether it is Quad, they are not inimical to our interests, but they are very standoffish because they don't want to, be in trouble with other superpowers. And although militarily they are not very strong at this point in time, but we should not
Or
under.
economically, they are not in any position to impose their will on anyone.
Uh, yes, but again, we should not be underestimating Indonesia. It has a lot of geostrategic importance. So I thought that under Udasin,
Dr. Adityanji, these are the kind of discussions that should be happening in the Foreign Office.
yes, yes, I agree. Uh, Let me read another question. It is from Mr. Carl Clemens. And the question is, what is the historical timeline of original Kautilya? Is he the same as Chanakya of Chandragupta's time, or was that a legend woven in Mutra Rakshas?
So, Chanakya, Kautilya, and Vishnugupta are the same. Vishnugupta was his name. Chanakya was because his father was called Chanak, so Chanakya. And Kautilya is his Gotra. So, these are the names of the same person. And the timeline is in keeping with the Mauryan period. So he was the one who actually recognized Chandragupta when he was a young child, brought him to the Takshashila Gurukul, raised him, and then they fought the Nandas, and then Chandragupta became the Samrat. So, on a balanced evaluation of evidence, although given that this was thousands of years ago, it's not like saying that Nehru was the prime minister in 1957. It's not as straightforward as that. But given an analysis of evidence, it is more than clear that Chanakya was a minister for Chandragupta Maurya in the city of Patliputra at the time of the Mauryan Empire. And the sources for that, again, like I told you in the beginning, they are from the Badkaha and its various recensions. They are from certain Buddhist and Jain works about Ashok Maurya and Chandragupta Maurya, because he is said to have also been associated with Bindusar, who was the son of Chandragupta, as his minister. But of
Yes.
course, he was dead by the time Ashok came around. Because if you remember, Chandragupta is said to have ascended to the throne when he was 25 years old, and he gave up the throne when he was 50 years old. And he became a Jain monk and went to Shravan Belgola. So that those 25 years and a few years of the reign of Bindusar, Chanakya was supposed to be there. So if you are interested, then I can send an articles that I have written about Chanakya and a web series that I make. So those will deal with these questions in even greater detail.
I think that's a very good and very generous, of you to offer that, because our membership is very curious and very intrigued, and they would like to educate themselves much more. And there are suggestions about, maybe you should write more books, and which you are doing, but I think they are not very widely circulated in the strategic studies circle. So this is not, I mean, this is the second time you are coming to us. I do not envisage that there would ever be a last time, because you'll keep on coming to our forum, and not just, have presentations at VIF. And we are going to use your intellect and your scholarship in some of the educational programs. There's another question, and that is coming from Satya Dosapati. Uh, how would you categorize US, which is seeking Bharat as a leverage against China, but also engaging in regime change through Kashmir via ISI, leaving weapons in Afghanistan so they can have a pliable administration in Bharat? It's a great question. You have already answered it, but you can.
Although, I'd just like to add, Dr. Adityanji, that in my opinion, this framework should also be made issue wise. So, on the issue of Kashmir, we have different scenarios, and the
Yes.
US will be in a different position. Maybe it will be more like an ARI, perhaps on the issue of Quad or on the issue of when we deal with China. There are certain issues on which the US will be in the position of our ally. There are some cases where it will be in the position of an ARI. So, in my opinion, issue wise scenarios should be made, and this framework should be made for each issue, because it's not a simple black and white world. Countries do different things and they behave in different ways, and it would add a lot to our clarity if we made issue wise different scenarios for everything. So in one case the US would be our ally, in another case it would be our enemy, and we must think of it issue wise.
So I think very well said. Geopolitics is fluid.
Hmm.
It is never frozen in time. It is never static. You know, uh, each day, each week brings a new, balance or new dynamic influences. So we cannot be just frozen in time while conceptualizing the challenges. But it is a good framework, and I'm seeing a comment from Carl Clemens that US has a classic Dvedi Bhav policy on Bharat, and saying the policy of engagement, which United States diplomatic corps is very fond of, because that concept was given by a US diplomat of Afghan origin, Zalmay Khalilzad. So what they are doing is that they are, engaging India, simultaneously containing us on a number of issues, including nuclear issues and all, but making sure that we never outgrow, the box they have pigeonholed for us, so we don't become a threat to them. So that is what it is.
So we should do our own Dvedi Bhav, Dr. Adityanji. We should do our own Dvedi Bhav from our side. And I feel that we are taking baby steps towards that now.
I think there's a change in thinking. I am very, very positive that we are back to basics, and learning from our original thinkers, policymakers, and strategists. I certainly don't take actually either Kutniti or word kutil or kautil in a negative sense. It is a very calculated clinical area where you have to be dispassionate and sometimes you have to, keep emotions in check when it's a question of paramount national interest. So time has come for us to, use paradigms and frameworks that are original to us. I'm very thankful to you, Sumedha ji, for coming for the second time in 3 months. And I can assure you that we will be inviting you more often.
You know what, Dr. Adityanji, we should discuss Bhed, and we should discuss the use of art, artists, etc. as fifth column. And Kautilya has a wonderful exposition of that, which I feel is so very applicable again to the way in which media and information is being used to manipulate the world. That again is something which he was very prescient about.
Point is very well taken. What I'm saying is that there will be a continuation of our educational efforts, and you are welcome, and you will be welcome in our future educational efforts in this area. And we hope that this will help for the cause of India. I'm also thankful to the audience. It is a 3 day long weekend where everyone goes on vacation or is traveling. So for people to be able to come up on Saturday, long Memorial Day weekend, I think tells me of their, you know, sort of determination to learn from you. I'm also thankful to Team CSA, specifically Mr. Ripudaman Pachori, Mr. Ankush Bhandari, and Mr. Rajiv Verma, who helped me in organizing and do the, back office work for these seminars. So I'm thankful to them. And we had a wonderful session. Just for our audience, this seminar has been recorded. It would be available on our YouTube channel within next 24 hours, and we will circulate so it becomes a permanent educational resource material. And lastly, I am again very thankful to our esteemed speakers, Sumedha Verma Ojha.
Thank you very much, everyone who was here. I hope this was useful and interesting for the strategic community. I am willing to share my email. Somebody was asking for my email. I think it can be put in the chat box. So I
Okay.
don't mind if anyone wants to email me. And I look forward to further engagement, further ideas. This is something which needs to be developed. Thank you very much, Dr. Adityanji, for helping to do that.
And I would say one last word, it was an intellectual feast. Thank you very much indeed.
Namaskar.
We are
Thank you.
going to end the meeting. Namaskar.
Namaskar.